GM, just a quick one before we get going. So, as you know, the Blocmates podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Certainly shouldn't be considered as financial advice. We have absolutely no idea what we're talking about half the time. So, any investment decision you do make should be based on your own research and your understanding of the risks involved. One more thing as well, there's around 50% of people who listen regularly who aren't subscribed yet. So, if you please could just do us a favor and hit the subscribe or the follow button or the like button, helps content grow, helps us grow, helps it reach more people like yourselves, and it means the world to us as well. So that's the last I'll ask of you. So yeah, let's get to the episode.
Welcome back, everyone. We have Chris from Summer.fi, one of the coolest names, and I'm sure a cool story behind it. Can't wait to hear about it. Chris, welcome. It's great to have you on the Blocmates podcast and YouTube stream. Welcome.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, based in one of the better places in the UK. Definitely a place I want to visit. Chris, it's good to have you. Please, can you give us an intro as to your background in crypto and your involvement with Summer.fi, and just a short kind of summary on your journey thus far?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So obviously Chris at Summer, and I started my kind of crypto journey back in like 2018. I was one of the first product managers at Maker, responsible primarily for the various UIs they had, from like governance and DAI dashboard and the CDP portal back in the day. And and obviously we Summer used to be Oasis.app back there that launched on the launch of multi-collateral DAI. And in June 21, when the Maker Foundation kind of dissolved and kind of all of like the community assets given, I handed over to the DAO, and we took Oasis.app, which at the time was just a MakerDAO front end, to accessing the Maker protocol. Kind of took that out into a separate entity, and kind of tried to make it, or trying to make it the best place to borrow and earn in DeFi. So kind of expanding that well beyond MakerDAO, the Maker protocol, to basically what you see today. So covering a much wider array of DeFi and so on. And kind of to complete that kind of separation really earlier this year, changing the name from Oasis to which had a long history with Maker back in the Oasis DEX days. It's like one of the very first DEXs on Ethereum. To Summer.fi now, kind of trying to bring crypto summer kind of vibes back as much as we can.
So I love the name. I think it's obviously really apt in terms of, if you've been around since the beginning of kind of like the official DeFi. Obviously we had DeFi Summer, and you guys have obviously picked up off of that. But obviously, there's great pedigree there from the Maker stable and the rest of it. And clearly the inspiration must have been there from your days there. I mean, how have you seen kind of like, I think it's fair to say, the evolution of Maker and how that's maybe inspired you guys to do what it is that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, my background's always kind of been in kind of consumer facing apps, and kind of with a focus on UX really, and UX kind of generally always winning out. And when I joined Maker, obviously the first Maker protocol launched in December 2017. I joined kind of first half of 2018 when we just had, and I don't know, like if you remember that, just a DAI dashboard, when it was about 7 or 8 clicks and transactions to borrow DAI. Like obviously now we call it SAI as the first one, the single collateral DAI. But you had to go through so many steps, and every step was a transaction back then, and it was just like almost like kind of horrendous in a way. And that was the kind of the first bit really, kind of like we came in and like delivered the CDP portal, which was the first time we kind of like deployed, I think, DS proxy at that point, which enabled us to kind of group transactions together. So if you wanted to like lock ETH and borrow DAI against it, you just needed to sign a single transaction. And that was kind of groundbreaking for us at the time, and being able to just like repay DAI and automatically swap some of that for MKR in the background to pay the stability fee on the first version. But yeah, it's kind of crypto. It still does today, and DeFi in particular still has a kind of a UX problem really. Like UX is not at the forefront, and probably quite rightly so as well. Like we've got to get the underlying technology right first. It's no good making something look pretty if it doesn't actually work. But yeah, for me now and even back then, it was kind of like let's if we want to get lots of users in, we've got to massively improve the UX, right? There's only that small group of very early adopters that are prepared to jump through like 100 clicks and maybe 10 tabs to get the job done. Our aim is for you to just need one place basically to access everything you need to in DeFi to get your job done, really.
I'd like to come back to the UX discussion because it's also one of my kind of like pet subjects. I like to kind of test protocols and discuss, you know, like, and almost like challenge protocols around like how do you plan on improving UX. But before we get to that, I wanted to just like really pinpoint what it is that you guys set out to do, what it is that you're doing now, and how you would like to position yourselves going into the future. So I think there's almost like 3 parts to that question.
Yeah. So at the very start, obviously, we were just the kind of the default, like the kind of de facto front end to the Maker protocol, but built in such a way, while in the foundation, that we kind of left it open for others in the community to build front ends on top of, right? So there were others like the likes of like we had like DeFi Saver, which at the time was like CDP Saver when it first came out. There was InstantApp that built on top of it as well, and kind of our role really was to kind of create a template. But it was a template that gave the information, but didn't do too much more. So we didn't want to stifle any competition or anything like that in the early days, when the kind of original vision of like the Maker protocol and others was to have all of these different UIs to access kind of the Maker protocol and maybe others. It didn't really kind of work out exactly like, and maybe its original vision was like, I think like the original vision was like crypto was going to grow so fast and so quickly that everyone would just build on top of it. Like we had a very big integrations team and they would just integrate on top of it, really. So at the point where the foundation was going and we had the opportunity to take the product out, we took a step back and we actually had a ton of user research. So we have an amazing UX researcher back in the foundation that's still with us today in Summer, who would just basically carry out user interviews, like several user interviews a week, speaking to users who use not just the Maker protocol, but like the other protocols as well, particularly AAVE and Compound back then, to understand exactly what it is that users are trying to do. So like we've, for instance, internally use the jobs to be done framework, where you kind of say, okay, what is the job that the user is trying to do? And then it's up to us to build the tools to allow them to do that job in the easiest and best possible way. So we had this ton of research and it felt almost like a cheat sheet back in 2021 of like, okay, we know what users want. We know what users are not getting from the kind of market. Like we know their workarounds, which was like Excel sheets, like 10 different tabs, like Etherscan, and like trying to decode things on Etherscan and so on. And it was kind of just like, why is it this complicated? And when we first took it out, like we kind of like our kind of mission, our mantra in a way was like the easiest place to deploy and manage your capital in DeFi. And there was a real emphasis then on kind of ease of use. So it was reducing the amount of clicks as much as possible. It was still focusing on Maker, but long term we had this like onion diagram basically, and we kind of just the onion expanded more and more and more as to kind of like where adding on the layers in a way. So there was the Maker protocol, there was like swapping, there was then automation, there was then deploying into DeFi, there was then multiple positions as one position, almost like an ETF in some senses, right? And that's taken us kind of through today to just be like the best place to borrow and earn. Because when we really step back and look at it, there was really kind of two users in DeFi. There was those that have a lot of assets and holding a lot of assets that want to make the most out of those assets, whether that's borrowing liquidity from them to make a large external purchase somewhere else, but leaving in the technology and not wanting to give up on the assets, or it was borrowing against their assets to effectively buy like all of the kind of altcoins and stuff. So like hold their safe tokens that might do another 5 to 10x kind of one day, but use the liquidity from them, which they know are probably going to have long-term value, but use that liquidity to try and find the 100x tokens and so on. And we still see a lot of those users today, even in this current market. There's still people borrowing against ETH, like borrowing against like ETH or Wrap BTC or someone like their kind of blue chip tokens that they really believed in back in the day, to buy the new up and coming tokens and so on. And then there's what we saw basically a lot of in like kind of 21, 22 as well, when we had high yields in DeFi, which was like people just want to earn on the assets they're holding now. So like we've got the the yield looped ETH strategies are like extremely popular across DeFi, right? Like whether you use like staked ETH, Rocket ETH, CB ETH, or whatever, like yield looping that yield. So like you can go and get that 4% fairly comfortably, but humans are greedy by their nature, right? And if you can earn a bit more, then as we know, most people will earn a bit more if they understand the risks, and so on. But one key for us was to always be transparent, and also the other thing is only support protocols and tokens that we would also use ourselves. So there's obviously been such a history in DeFi of protocols getting rugged and protocols spinning up over a weekend, tens or hundreds of millions in 2021 piling into a protocol on like a Monday morning, and then by Tuesday morning it was gone, or it was a bug or an exploit found or whatever. So we've kind of always had this kind of curated experience on Summer.fi as well, that if we wouldn't use it ourselves, then we wouldn't make it available to other users to use. And we made that conscious decision back in 2021 to say that although we want to be this best place to kind of access DeFi, that doesn't mean that we will support everything under the sun on there. And what you'll get is probably the best and the safest place to access DeFi, and all of the various protocols and tokens that we support. But yeah, and that's where we are today. Still trying to kind of do that jobs to be done, like 3 core jobs of helping users like maximize their assets, help them earn on their assets without taking much risk, and help them understand how they're performing on their assets. And we've had those 3 jobs since 2021, and I imagine we'll have those 3 jobs in 2 years' time still as well.
And where would you like to, just coming back to the third part of the question, I mean, where would you like to see, like when you sit and you kind of like have a vision that you'd like to fulfill with this protocol, where do you see that, and how do you see that looking, besides having 50 billion, kind of like in TVL? I mean, that goes without saying, but I mean, just from the user experience, is there something that you'd like to do better or different going forward, or are you happy with the product in its current form?
I mean, definitely not happy with it in its current form from a point of view as it's still far too hard to like kind of really manage your own keys and so on. Although that is not something necessarily that we want to like go and solve. Like I would say we're not the experts at kind of like the key management or anything like that. There's a number of great projects working on that side of things that we will happily just integrate with once they're ready and once we believe they're safe to integrate and so on. But in reality, like hopefully DeFi just becomes as easy to use as it does as like an app on your, like a fintech app on your phone, as like say TransferWise or something. Like you want to go and just send like the way you can just send money around the world with TransferWise, and the fact it's integrated into so many other fintechs. I think from our point of view is hopefully like Summer becomes almost that integration into many other fintech apps eventually as well. So where DeFi has maybe grown and grown and grown, as an end user, like if we pick like probably like 20 people on the street, 19 of them probably might be using DeFi in 5 or 10 years time without even knowing they're using DeFi. So if they've got savings pots on their kind of like mobile banking apps or their investment apps or whatever, they might be investing into a number of these products without even realizing it. Like we're still very much at the kind of early adopter stage at the moment, and it's very much kind of almost like you're almost your own mechanic on the car in a way, right? Like you've got to know all of the kind of the ins and outs of kind of what's going on still. To be able to make those decisions, you've got to understand certain terms. Like eventually we want to abstract all of that away, kind of abstract away the protocols ideally in like maybe 5 years time, right? That you'll just come to Summer and you'll deposit into a pot and it will yield you 5.5%, or you'll take a slightly higher risk one and you'll yield like 7.5 or 8%, or something like that. That at the moment is still very much kind of pick and choose. And that's right, I think, for the user group that we've got today, like maybe like yourself and so on, like you know what you want, like you know the protocol you want, you know the tokens you want, you know what you want to do with those tokens, and you maybe just come to Summer to actually find the right product for that specific token and specific goal. But in reality, that isn't what we do, right? Even today with investment apps and like wealth management apps and so on, like there's very few that are picking individual stocks or the individual kind of percentages in their ETFs or whatever. They're just going into like, hey, like risk 6 out of 7, good for a 10-year investment deposit. that for me is exactly how I kind of see DeFi kind of evolving down the lines as well. Like, it's very fancy and very flashy and stuff at the moment, but it almost needs to become more boring if we want to get those kind of hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people using it around the world.
I completely agree on all points. I think abstraction is key. And I think it's actually a great moment to bring in the UX discussion, because I think that's one of the reasons why UX has always been a challenge to get right, because you kind of like, you almost got to go through that, like the University of Hard Knocks, to get into that point where you understand what's going on. You make those mistakes, using stuff like MetaMask. I think, there's obviously been a lot of improvements, a lot of great products that are coming through. And I think the biggest challenge for you guys building, a great product is that UX side of it. I mean, what do you think the biggest challenges have been for you as Summer.fi, and kind of getting the UX right, or to a point where you are satisfied with it at the moment? I would imagine that you are. I think your UX is great. What do you think the biggest challenge is going forward for you guys?
I think it's very difficult. I mean, one big challenge is really balancing the amount of information you provide to the user. So we know right now that we've got a very, very wide kind of array of users that are using the UI. We know that from when we speak to them, and the information that we're going to get back from them as well is some very much want a lot of the information abstracted away. They just want to like click, 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 and they're done. And there's others, like generally much wealthier kind of whale users that are doing trades or transactions, which actually they need a lot of information in there to be able to make the right decision, such as like maybe price impacts or something like that, or like kind of the risk they're taking on, or like the likelihood of like a liquidation having such a big impact on their position and so on. And that balance is pretty hard, and that balance is made harder the fact that every protocol is trying to find their kind of like USP and wanting to do something a little bit different. And we have to try and, like, one of our key jobs is to try and standardize as much information as possible. And it's difficult to standardize information when every protocol is trying to do something to make them stand out and be a little bit different, and so on. So like, you standardize the information, and then a protocol comes along and wants to do something completely differently in like the lending side, for example. And you're like, oh, how does that fit in, and how do we educate our users? The other huge challenge is just the sentiment in the market as well. And like, I think it's super easy sometimes to kind of blame the market, but that sentiment and like kind of what's going in the market creates such a kind of like a wave back and forth of different users. So in 2021, we had so many brand new users, so many simple basic questions, like how do we help these types of users get started? Like, how do we help them find the right products, or whatever, and find the right risk level? Then the entire market obviously kind of crashes or whatever. We have this kind of like fairly long-term bear market, and we go all the way back to really just the OGs of crypto, like particularly just if you look at Twitter now, right? It's the same Twitter handles that were basically around in 2017, 2018 that are still the only ones kind of talking again. And those users know a lot more and so on, and they're asking for like kind of more advanced features and so on. And but those features aren't long-term features, right? Like, they're asking for like particular strategies, particular things, which are like, okay, we could deliver that now, but that they're not going to be used by 90% of the users that come back hopefully when the market turns again. But that turning market also just has an effect of what people want to do as well, right? Like, there isn't like we talk about it being a bear market, but the volatility is just kind of gone really this year in particular. Like, it's been such a crab market, and like sideways crab market, and it's just it takes away a lot of opportunities as well, and that makes it difficult as well, I think, just to kind of like build the right product and build the right features, because sometimes a lot of the features that we have rely on that volatility, and actually it's very hard to understand how well those features are working and how well users are using them when they really need to use them, when you don't get the market conditions for that. So we've got a number of kind of automation strategies that kind of people want and people like use, but they rely almost on an upwards market and a kind of bouncy or a bumpy upwards market. and we've developed them and they're there, but they just don't. You can't really test them, or they don't really get used because the market's going in the wrong direction. But we know, unfortunately, how well the down market automation protections work, because they've been used so much in the last 18 months by users, but also because of the market as well.
I think what's interesting about Summer.fi for me is that, like I said at the start of our chat, is that you guys have approached this thing in quite an interesting way, in that you have been sensitive to what users want. You have been mindful of where do the potential I think the right way of perceiving it is where do people want to go with this idea of earning yield, lending, borrowing, and then obviously the more degen side of things where you're looping and the rest of it. And then you guys have taken that to a really cool level where you said, you know what, we're going to create a whole lot of products within that, and you're going to name them, and you're going to almost articulate a low risk, medium risk, and a high risk strategy. And I'm sure from a strategy perspective, there's probably a dozen different approaches that you can take depending on your risk for appetite. But I wanted to just go through the motions around the different products that you guys have had, that you guys have developed. And obviously that ties in with what it is that you're saying. It's volatility breeds a different kind of mentality, and with that mentality comes different risk profiles and the rest of it. So you guys obviously, I'm assuming obviously that you guys obviously peg down your different products. Can you just walk us through those, and am I on the right track here?
Yeah. So we've got Borrow, which is kind of our bread and butter, right? That's the the classic maker product. And again, that is really, it's allowing you to borrow against the assets you hold in a very simplistic way, like a house loan or whatever. You put up the collateral and you borrow tokens against it, predominantly stable coins. It's predominantly DAI and USDC are the dominant two. And this is a great product for a fairly non-volatile market, really, because volatility in a borrow position creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of nervousness, and sits you on your computer or your phone constantly checking the prices if you've got that liquidation ratio or that liquidation price, depending on how you think about it. And and we know it can be very stressful. We've seen back in Black Thursday in March 2020, what can happen then when there is a huge drop, and a lot of people do have these borrow positions, and what that can do in the market. But that is there to enable you, as I alluded to before, either use the liquidity from your assets to either go and make a big purchase outside. So whether you're buying a car on a very cheap loan, effectively, or buying a new TV or a house deposit or whatever. And we've got a number of these use cases we've heard from users of what they've done. But also, again, it's using it to buy maybe the more volatile tokens out there as well, and ones that actually maybe don't have as much usage in DeFi. But you really don't want to get it. You might say if you're really, really holding your ETH, and you've built an ETH stack, and you really don't want to get rid of it, but you also don't want it just sitting there. You can use that in a variety of ways on all of our products. But Borrow is one where you, as we see with users, they use it to buy other altcoins and so on, really, looking for that 100x return basically on some of those tokens from the liquidity of their ETH. And typically you'll see there people with liquidation ratios of 250 to or collateral ratios of 250% plus, right? At least 2.5 to 3x the size of their loan, collateral to loan, really, or less than a 40% loan to value or something like that. We've then got Multiply, which is Borrow, supercharged Borrow basically there, and Multiply really is just a UI and UX product on top of Borrow. So what we saw a lot was people use, and we still do actually in a manual way, but people use a Borrow vault to, let's say, deposit ETH, borrow DAI, go and swap that DAI for more ETH, deposit that ETH back into the vault, potentially borrow more DAI from it again, swap into ETH and come back. Multiply is allows you to do that just in a single transaction. So you would pick say 2x or 3x exposure to maybe your ETH, and you could go long or short on that. And you kind of just pick it on a slider, because we think that's the easiest and best way to do that. And it shows you all of the information you need, such as like liquidation price, liquidation ratio, and so on. And you can, you can do it, and it will make the trades for you, and it will utilize flash loans. I remember actually speaking to someone back in, I think, kind of mid 2021 or late in 2021, talking to them, and they were talking about how flash loans are probably like the worst invention in DeFi in their opinion, because flash loans are only ever used for like hacks and exploits, basically. And it felt really good to be able to explain how we're using flash loans in this really positive way to help users save at the time when gas was like 500, 600, 700 gwei, like save so much money on gas fees, because you're no longer doing 6 or 7 transactions. It's one transaction, and it puts your vault or your position in the exact state you want it at the end. So you've got this single transaction from like 8 transactions to 1 transaction, really, which is what multiply is. And then we've got our earn products, which range really from the very, like, earn is just earn a yield on the tokens you're holding, basically. Like, help me earn on the assets without taking too much risk, and in some cases really no risk at all. So we've got the very, very basic earn products, which is like the DAI savings rate back from the MakerDAO, where you're just locking your DAI into the Maker system, into the DAI savings rates contract, and it's paying you at a yield, which, like, as of today is like 5%. It unfortunately was like 0% for several years after Black Thursday. But that is the simplest and easiest product we have. We've then kind of got the next level up, where you can just lend into protocols such as like AAVE or Compound or Ajna when it was live, where you were just lending tokens for others to basically borrow. So like if you find a token that's in demand to be borrowed against, such as DAI and USDC, particularly when the market's more volatile, then you earn higher rates on those, because the demand in a lot of these protocols is often for kind of like leverage like trading, or like kind of multiply trading. And the more demand it is for there, the higher rates people are willing to pay, particularly if the market is going up. Because if the market is going up 10, 20, 30, 40% maybe a year, and you're 2 or 3x exposed to that, you're not too worried about paying 5 or 6% to borrow the funds for that, really. And then you've got the slightly more, I don't want to say degen earn strategies, really, because we really don't cater to degens really at all on our thing, but the slightly higher risk, like ones which are, they're high risk, but in my eyes are still fairly low risk strategies, which is like the yield loop strategies, really, for like staked ETH and so on, where you can go and get like 10x or 9x exposure to the staked ETH yield. It isn't, unfortunately, 9x returns, because you've got to pay a borrow rate. So it's kind of like, it's still multiply under the hood, which is ultimately borrow under that hood still. But you're locking staked ETH, you're borrowing ETH, and you're effectively arbitraging the yield in a way. You're taking the arbitrage rate between the yields. So if staked ETH is paying 4% and it costs you 3% to borrow, and you're doing that 9x, you're earning somewhere between like 10 and 12% on that, because you've got your core staked ETH yield the very first time, and then you're borrowing kind of like 9 times the debt against that. So you're paying 3% on all the borrow rates you're earning, but every time you swap that back to staked ETH, you're then earning 4% on that new staked ETH. So yeah, you could go and just stake with Lido or at home for like 3 or 4%, or you could use like this yield loop strategy for like maybe 10%, but it comes with some risks, and those risks are liquidation still. So you can be liquidated, and when you've yield looped like to 10x, if you get liquidated, there's very, very, very little collateral left over at the end, right? So it kind of is it's a kind of all or nothing in reality. But again, you can look at the data, and you can use your own confidence and say, okay, like pretty much on AAVE, which is the most popular avenue for doing this at the moment, and Compound, like you can't go beyond, I think, 90% or something from on these on the loan to value. And what that means roughly is like the liquidation point on your positions is around 90 cent, or like 0.9 like staked ETH to ETH. And if you look at the history, like even in those really like kind of volatile staked ETH times where the peg kind of really dropped heavily back in, I can't even think what it kind of was now, but like back in like kind of November 2022 or September 22, kind of just a month or two before the merge, basically. The price dropped to like, I think 90.93. really. So when you're there, maybe having a liquidation price of 0.85 as something kind of fairly safe. Like if you can look at that and go, okay, something really catastrophic has to happen for that to be liquidated. And let's be honest, if it hits 0.85, then something's gone catastrophically wrong anyway with the entire kind of market and ecosystem. Everybody is getting out of staked ETH or Rocket ETH or CB ETH, whatever it is, and something's gone wrong, right? So it is a fairly high risk strategy, but probabilities or chance maybe or something like that going wrong, or I think are fairly low. And then across kind of, so there are kind of core 3 products on that borrow, multiply, and earn, and then we've got products layered on top of those as well, kind of to add on to the value, really, or kind of adding in superpowers really to kind of all of these things and supercharging your positions, which is like the primary one is automation. And so you can automate a borrow vault, you can automate a multiply vault, you'll soon be able to automate earn vaults as well to be able to maximize the earnings and returns and protect you as well from some losses on there. But these automations are again split into kind of two camps really. You've got protection, which is by far our like biggest and most successful automation feature that we have, and this really is protecting you from the downside of losses, really. So instead of potentially being liquidated, paying like a 13% liquidation penalty, when liquidations happen, 9 times out of 10, there's other liquidations happening as well, and there's other people being liquidated, probably on multiple protocols and so on, and you can suffer some slippage from the price that you're like expecting to get from your liquidation price, basically. But we have several different automation products. We have the first one, which is auto sell, which effectively just kind of de-risks your position gradually. So if you think of it kind of from a maker point of view of the call ratio, let's say every time it hits 180%, it'll kind of sell you back to 200%, and that will keep going and keep going. However, like that is an extremely dangerous strategy as well. If you have that on, like that can just basically ride you all the way to the bottom, selling. So one of the key kind of features that we put on that, which we didn't see anyone else have in DeFi at the time yet, it was something that users like were saying that they desperately wanted, was we had a lower sell bound. So only do this automated sell, say like down to like $1,500 or like ETH DAI basically. So if it goes below that, don't auto sell, and then kick in maybe the next automation product, which is for us, again, our most successful one is stop loss. So this is just kind of get me out of my position. So as a user, you don't always want to get out of your position immediately, like straight away. So you can maybe have a couple of auto sells turned on, or sell it down to a certain point, like literally your stop loss point, and then allow, if price goes any lower than that, allow your stop loss to kick in. And our stop loss products, I mean, we kind of had a running kind of theme in the company, but we launched our first stop loss product the day before Luna Terra blew up in 2022, and there was nothing like kind of like trial by fire like that day. And I think for like every time, like there was maybe two users adding stop loss, because people were just adding it then like instantly. Like we had some success metrics, like okay, if we get 10 positions automated in the first week, that's success, and like 50 by the end of the first month or whatever. And I think by the end of that, like first day and a half, there was like over 150 that had been added. I think like almost like 90 odd that had been executed in that first day, and they were just kicking in. But it's proven to work extremely well over the time. We still have over like kind of, I think 25% of our positions, or 20% I think it is now, like are still have stop loss protection on them. I think it's over 25% if you just look at like kind of borrow and multiply. Most users turn that on now when they create a position, because it's kind of a no-brainer, right? It like, do you want to like guarantee a loss of like 15% if you get liquidated, or do you want to have a very, very, very good chance of saving that 15% and be stop lossed out before that happens? And obviously you can choose your stop loss price much higher than the liquidation ratio if you want to. So if you want to stop loss it out just $100 below, because you're opening a position, say, hey, I don't really want to lose anything, so I'm going to open it up on like an ETH position, set the stop loss like $50 or $100 below what it is today, and hopefully just ride it up. But I know that it will close me out, and it might even close me out to DAI or USDC if I want it to. It doesn't have to close out to ETH. And then we got our optimization positions, which are kind of our automation ones to help you maximize your profits in a way. And they're fairly basic. today. Like kind of on the backlog, we got some much more advanced ones coming, kind of like buy the dip strategies and so on. But they're obviously like trying to get human intuition into into those, and even human intuition gets it wrong a lot of the time. So how do you automate that in such a way, and like using a lot of back data to try and find strategies and so on, right? But the patterns out there are extremely difficult, and that's got to be supported by a stop loss as well, because you can't get that wrong like very often, right? But the optimization ones we have are constant multiple. So like keep my position targeting 3x. Again, within the bounds, like upper price and lower price. And then we've got auto buy as well, which is just kind of one side of constant multiple, but the opposite to auto sell, which effectively just helps you buy on the way up. But again, with an upper bound if you want to, which is like do not buy above this price. So if you've got an upper bound of say, hey, I don't want to be buying ETH above $2,500, like that is just that's the price level for me. You can set auto buy to do its thing, and it will just buy all the way up to like $2,500, whatever percentage kind of step you want it to. So if that's kind of like, hey, every time my vault like kind of increases by 5% LTV, buy it like down another 5%. Basically. And that's one that, again, unfortunately, because that launched in 2022, summer of 2022, we haven't really seen it used much. There's been certain days where those have kicked in and shown to work pretty well. So like the FTX back in November, when FTX kind of the market dropped, CZ came in as like our kind of like Lord Savior in a way at the time, to say he was going to rescue it, and the market picked up, and then he pulled out and the market went down. So we saw a lot of these kind of automations kicking in and out. And then at the beginning of this year, we saw some kind of optimism in the market, like kind of late January, February, March time. And we saw some of these strategies coming in, and we saw users enabling them again, because the market allowed for these strategies to kind of be effective and work. But unfortunately, it didn't really take off. But that's kind of our core offering in a way. And yeah, we've got a few other new kind of exciting things coming up, particularly on top of maybe Ajna protocol. A little bit sooner, kind of more kind of yield aggregation stuff, and maybe the same with like kind of AAVE and Compound as well. Just being able to deposit, kind of we talked about that vision in a couple of years, but just coming in and depositing USDC or DAI or whatever, and it just keeping you balanced in a good yield position, kind of throughout. Really, kind of what we term it, kind of lazy vaults, really. So if it's more that lazy user, so again, not really the users of today, the kind of DeFi OGs, the know-it-alls, really the ones that know exactly what they want and how they want to achieve something. Like that's what our products are primarily for today.
I absolutely love it. I think what you guys have done is exactly what is needed. It's like, for me, like what I really love about what you guys have done are the simulations, because at the end of the day, like it's almost like let's replace those spreadsheets with functional demonstration of exactly what a strategy looks like, and you obviously have them laid out on the website. I was going to ask the question, like, why use any other lending and borrowing platform if you've got Summer.fi? And it's kind of like you answered the question for me. So I've asked the question in light of you having answered it already. So thanks for that. And it really is, it is very dynamic. So for anyone who is listening, I didn't actually know about Summer.fi, and we were told about it through a friend of ours, and I was looking at, going and trying it out. It was kind of like I was curious, and I always used AAVE, and it's something that I've always been active in terms of borrowing and obviously earning and the rest of it. And I haven't done a full migration across because I only recently started looking into what you guys have done. But for me, the most impressive was the simulations, and kind of like, where do the opportunities lie in the market at the moment, and where can I maximize, that borrowing profile. And for me, my favorite is definitely the simulations that you guys have got built in, and I really encourage you to do more of that. I wanted to just kind of come back to kind of like the structure that you guys have in Hardworks, because you've obviously alluded to AAVE and Maker and the rest of it. How have you guys, from an infrastructure perspective, partnered with these protocols just if you can just give us an outline as to how that relationship works, and then obviously like bringing in the discussion with oracles and kind of like, you know, where does the price checks come in, and obviously the balancing come in from that point onwards.
Yeah. So the different protocols we work with, and really we don't have a template or a kind of a structure really that we follow or must follow or anything like that. I mean, going back to the Maker we were in, it was all created in the Maker team, right? So like mid-June when we took it into that separate entity, it was like 15 of us that all from the Maker team that have been working on Maker. So we had a very, very good relationship with the Maker team since day one. Like we worked side by side with them for a long time. AAVE, we knew people in the community. AAVE just almost from being in the Maker and like kind of Maker and AAVE being kind of old school projects almost together. Like we knew many people in it from a community point of view in there and so on. Never had the quite such close relationship, but I mean that as well amplifies DeFi as to what DeFi is and the amazingness of DeFi. Like I think it was 2019 when it was like we started using the term like DeFi Lego blocks and so on, right? Like we're like the Lego builders in a sense. Like we're trying to make the beautiful kind of Lego tower that you see at Legoland or whatever, right? Like we are there like pulling in the different bricks and the different colors in a way, and that's kind of like what AAVE was to us. From a Oracle side, they obviously use Chainlink and so on, and we're in a place where we just have to use whatever infrastructure they're using under the hood, particularly when it comes to oracles. Like we just need to support because we don't know like what price another oracle provider is going to show. So if they are using Chainlink, or as they do, they're using Chainlink, it is no good for us to use the Maker oracle to show you that price, because if Chainlink ends up reporting $100 less and you're at liquidation and we don't tell you you're at risk of liquidation, it's not AAVE or Chainlink you're going to be kind of like pissed at. You're going to be pissed at us, right? So we have to make sure that it's whatever they want to support that we have to support as well. But ultimately, it's the DeFi Lego blocks that makes it so. I don't want to say easy, because obviously there's a huge integration that goes into every single one, particularly of all the one-click stuff and so on. But the fact that we can do that, like we could actually integrate them without having a single conversation with them if we wanted to. Like that in reality isn't the way we do things and so on. But like that's available, and that's such a huge thing for DeFi that sometimes isn't really spoken about sometimes, right? That we're building all of these open. We talk about the transparency a lot, but these open systems that anybody can build on top of is just huge. And then the fact we can build all those features on top of them without having any agreements, because they're a DAO, so who would you even sign agreements with and so on? But we can just make use of their technology, and it's so different to how that is today. We've got Ajna, for example, on there. They were on there a few weeks ago. Obviously, they'll be coming back very soon again. But the Ajna team was actually also from Maker originally. So when they left Maker in kind of like 2021 as well, and they went out and started building Ajna, we knew who they were. We trusted them. For us, Ajna was the first protocol we've supported from launch, and it's something we've never done before. It's been okay, the safe curated protocols. But the difference is we really, really knew the team. We knew the team, and we trusted the team, and we're actually in conversations with them for months and months and months. About 9 months, like kind of with kind of the very first drafts of white papers and so on, kind of knowing what it was and knowing how it worked. But actually, from our point of view, it was kind of our head of BD now and our UX researcher kind of looking at the protocol and saying like, hey, this fits into the Summer.fi vision. Like this fits into Summer.fi vision, basically. Like that is like there's no ifs, like there's no we could make it work or anything. It fits into the Summer.fi vision, but it had one like really like huge unique aspect of it that we'd never dealt with before, which is the fact that it was an oracle-less protocol. And so we had Maker with their own oracles and the Oracle security module and the 1 hour delay. We had AAVE with Chainlink oracles that are effectively real time, based on the kind of deviation or the time expiration of the latest feed and so on. And like there's always kind of been, ever since like kind of 2017, the kind of Maker oracles versus Chainlink kind of argument, like who's better, who's more trustworthy and so on. And then Ajna came in with like, hey, we don't have any oracles at all. And there was this huge conversation at the time, like kind of early in Q2, like lots of Twitter spaces and stuff around this like concept of bring your own oracle. And this for us was like a fairly really novel idea, but a fairly big idea as well. Because obviously, if we think back to maybe a lot of the kind of hacks and exploits that happened in 2021 in particular, like 2020, 2021, when flash loans first became a thing, and flash loans enabled like so many different oracles to basically be exploited, whether you use things like the original Uniswap oracle and so on, and how you could manipulate prices on different places using flash loans and so on. And like all of a sudden, like this huge attack vector was suddenly being removed from it because they didn't need oracles and so on. So that was fascinating. However, it was such a complex protocol to understand, and you had to pick a lending price, and effectively that price obviously is just a ratio between those two tokens and so on, right? So like we made the conscious decision of bringing in the kind of blue chip kind of token pairs in a way of Ajna, but sticking like Chainlink oracles onto the UI to kind of give you an indication of, hey, like this is what Chainlink is actually reporting as the price. But this protocol doesn't rely on that price, but this is the price, right? And it's only profitable to obviously liquidate if the liquidation price obviously exceeds the price. But it was a really fascinating thing, and now we've got Morpho coming in soon as well, doing something even more kind of like don't say more fancy, but like a slightly different aspect as well. Another kind of bring your own oracle kind of ideas. I think they've talked about that a lot as well, where they kind of looked at AAVE and Compound, and they've looked at Ajna, and like they think they've got an even better way of managing the risk, basically, and that's ultimately what all these things come down to, which is managing risk. But yeah, we knew the Ajna team. What we are getting now a lot of is teams coming to us to say, hey, can you integrate this protocol or whatever? Like I think that's the one difference kind of maybe like this year compared to maybe the last few years when we were just Maker or Maker and AAVE last year. Now we're kind of much more of a DeFi like kind of DeFi hub, really. And now the protocols that kind of maybe want access to that TVL are like saying, can you support us? But that same mantra still applies as we talked about at the very start. Like, okay, would we use that protocol? Like, would we be a user on that protocol, regardless of like token incentives or whatever? Like, does that help us get our job done of like borrowing and earning in DeFi? And if it doesn't, and if we don't believe it would fit into kind of our user jobs and so on, then we wouldn't support it. Like we still are just going to be a curated list of protocol, like curated protocol list, basically, of like helping users get the job done, because we talked a lot about UX, and it's extremely difficult to have a clean and simple to understand and easy to use UX if you've got like 500 options to choose from and so on. So yeah, like how we work with protocols is every single one is different. Basically, it kind of comes down to ultimately, do we have a relationship or don't we? But if you've built the code in a really nice way, if it's really accessible, if it's open source, if it's extremely transparent, if you've had audits done, and you're doing something that means you add a benefit to our users, then we would be very little reason not to add the protocol to it. And we can either add that ourselves, it may take longer, or you can come in and help basically, and give us some support and show us like, or even if you have an SDK, it makes it 10 times easier. Because in reality, a lot of the work is not on the smart contract side. It's on all of the kind of plugging in the front end and the calculations and how to understand the different loan to values or lending prices or liquidation loan to values and so
on. I want to just go back to kind of like the kind of like the Ajna Oracle, and I'm sure there've been many discussions around this, but I want to just understand, like, in the essence of the way the channeling works versus Ajna. I mean, are they kind of like, isn't the one supposedly better than the other because it has a better check on the prices? I mean, how do they kind of like test internally whether the price is correct or not? Because the price is the price, right? But obviously there's kind of like the potential for the broken telephone. So how do you avoid a broken telephone with something like Ajna as opposed to channeling?
Yeah, so Ajna just doesn't have a telephone. Basically, there are no oracles. There is really, it's, we talked a lot in DeFi about being permissionless and trustless and so on. and there is really nobody to trust apart from the code. You've got to trust the code is right and is not going to rug you, basically. But there's no external parties to trust. So even with Maker, AAVE, Compound, they've all got Oracle parties that you ultimately have to trust. And like you said, the kind of almost the telephone line and things, right? Like with Chainlink, they reduced that or mitigate that, I think, by having tons of different sources. Like I think there's like 15 or 16 different sources for ETH, and they take the average or the median or whatever for those prices. So you've almost got to break like 10 of them or convince 10 to show the wrong price feed, and probably at the exact same moment as well, because as soon as people start to notice, then things happen. And I think still then they've got circuit breakers and stuff, but you are still relying on them. There are arguments that Chainlink could just push like with their multi-sig, like push different prices or whatever, or just turn off the oracles one day or something like that. I think that's highly, highly unlikely in reality. And also, I don't think we see regulators kind of like being able to move that fast or do anything and so on that quickly and in that much secrecy and so on. But yeah, like you are still relying on this centralized source. I actually think the likes of like Chainlink and so on are much, much better than maybe some of the ways we had it in like 2021, where we relied on maybe a single exchange. Like there was a number of protocols that relied on the Uniswap price. And then obviously we had things like that was in theory trustless, right? Like, this new Oracle, it's trustless. Like the Uniswap market doesn't lie. And then Flashstones came in and the Uniswap market can lie. Like in the middle of a block, for example. So like, and actually the centralized entities have the issue as well. I don't know if you remember, Compound had the flash crash on, like, is it DAI or USDC? I think it was 2020 or 2021, but the price very, very quickly dropped to like 92 cents or something, and then shot back up. But in that moment, it was at 92. Tons of positions got liquidated. Maker went in a different approach with its Oracle system, with the Oracle security module, where they kind of delayed the prices. So they took like a kind of median of the prices after an hour on every hour block, and then it also delayed the update of the main Oracle for 1 hour as well. So you also had this period to say, hey, look, if anyone does like if there is any false information going into the Oracles, everybody has a 1 hour delay. Now, in reality, 1 hour is pretty. It's not useless, but like that's kind of why we had our automation stuff in there. We always had an hour to kick anything in, but at the same time, like half the world is asleep at that point as well. And actually, it's often very difficult if you've got hardware wallets or whatever. Sometimes accessing some of these things, or like the gas price and getting transaction through on Ethereum can be extremely hard unless you're very rich at times, kind of ETH rich in a way, just to throw transactions through and get them done. But yeah, I mean, the core difference really, like when you ask between Chainlink and Ajna, is that Chainlink does rely on, you have to get the prices from a source somewhere. And although these sources are like, they're signed, they're like verifiable, whatever, you got Chronicle Labs now that are coming in, if they're like really pushing the fact that their Oracle feeds are verifiable. There's still a trust component. And just because someone's verifying it doesn't mean they've just got on record that say, hey, we've verified this is true, but like there might be a reason it's not true underneath, and they just need to get a false price in there for whatever reason. But Ajna removes that, because with Ajna, you as a lender, you lend up to a maximum price, effectively a maximum loan to value. So you say, I want to lend up to a maximum LTV of 90%. Obviously, somebody can borrow all your, or a group of people can borrow all of your assets in that price, and the price can maybe drop if it's a long pool, and so on. And then, but you would then only liquidate them when it's profitable in the market to be liquidated. So the arbitrages and the keepers and stuff would come in, and it would use proper kind of market dynamics to liquidate those positions when they can make a profit on the liquidation. So, and that's kind of their approach really, right? To say, like, we actually don't need oracles. And I think the concept works. One, it works very well for, like, obviously the big tokens and stuff, the ones that like have oracles and don't really need it. But it also works really well for brand new tokens. So if you imagine like airdrops, like of like Arbitrum airdrop or whatever, and we saw the prices like every time, right? We see them fluctuating around. Because Ajna is a completely permissionless pool, unlike AAVE, Compound, Maker, which have to have governance to vote the pools in, and it takes weeks, if not months sometimes. Ajna, you can go and create a pool on Ajna 1 block after that token is released, if you want to. So as soon as that token is released and you've got the token addresses or whatever, you can go in and create a pool on it, like a long pool, a short pool. Others can go and lend the debt token, the quote token into that pool, and you effectively create this market. Now, there was, of course, no oracles anywhere for it. The price is flying all over the place, but you can go and like go long, like on that market. If there's someone willing to provide the quote token on the other side, and more than likely someone is probably providing that quote token at maybe like 10 or 15% because of the risk on there. But then market arbitragers will be able to go and liquidate the positions themselves because you might be lending at like 90 cents. The price might only be, or you might be borrowing at 90 cents. The price might now just be 50 cents. And you can now very quickly just go and like, or someone else can come in and liquidate that position and make a big profit on there. Just because like this exchange is currently pricing this asset at 50 cents. This user's borrowing at 90 cents. Let's liquidate their position because I can make a big profit over here for that. And that's in theory, like kind of the way forward, right? That you really only need one exchange and like one place for real, like a price to be that price for you to go and liquidate it, which may sound scary for a user. And I think it is quite scary for a user because it's like, well, it could be liquidated at any point. But even if you get liquidated at that point, like the market is still the kind of the market price, and you shouldn't have suffered, really. But it removes that trust element, which is really fascinating. But we're yet to see if that kind of survives long term. Of course, like we live in a world where we trust a lot of things anyway, and just by removing things that we need to trust doesn't necessarily make them always better systems, right? But I think it's a super interesting avenue to go down.
I think the only way we really find out is when we do have that extreme volatility and it needs to be tested. It really just comes down to that. And you guys will obviously be at the forefront of that. I mean, that's what you guys probably watch more closely than anything else, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I test the products like daily, whether it's like using it or just testing new features and stuff. And sometimes it's a pretty depressing thing that you got to look at the price about 10 times a day. But but you're seeing that thing like happen, right? And you're seeing the fact that the prices are not moving very much, or you're seeing the prices move a lot. In fact, we have a channel where it constantly in Discord, it's constantly pumping out actions that are happening on our site, and we know normally through that channel before we've seen a price chart to think that the market has suddenly had a big movement one way or the other, because suddenly there's like tickets being printed almost, and users are on it sometimes.
Is that for admin access, or is it for everyone to be able to observe that channel?
It's just internal at the moment. Like we are looking at ways of opening that up further as well, because
I'd be very interested in having that in our Discord if it does become available. So please let me know.
All right.
Our community loves that kind of stuff. They absolutely love it. It'd be great.
Yeah.
So there's been 3 things that I take away from today's chat and interview with you, and that is that a lending and borrowing platform is never as straightforward as just lending and borrowing, because you very eloquently demonstrated just how many different aspects need to come together in order to do it effectively, efficiently, and enjoyable from a user experience. I think the second thing is that you made me feel extremely FOMO around all the opportunities that might be out there that I'm missing out on. So I need to go and do some studying. And then thirdly, I think, and probably the most important thing in light of what it is that you guys have been doing, is that it really is, I think, quite an interesting and enjoyable experience being on your website for one. And it kind of like in many ways, like I said, like the strategy stuff and the simulations that you guys have on there really does kind of feed into my FOMO. But at the same time, it also the information is there, which is quite a rare thing in DeFi, where users have to go to Blockmates, for example, to find out what the hell is going on, because that's obviously what we focus on doing. But you've removed a lot of that stuff and all that problem, and you've essentially like really focused on making the user experience not only an easier one, but also like an opportunity to grow within the space, which is quite rare, And I really think that, if people are listening to this and are watching this stream, just do yourselves a favor and go to Summer.fi. And just check it out. Even if you don't end up using it now, I promise you there will come a time when you will want to borrow, or you will want to lend, or you will want to earn. And I think out of everything out there, listen, AAVE made that process very easy, and it is very easy. And I think you guys have taken it a step further, if not 2 or 3 steps further. So that's my takeaways from today's talk. Really appreciate the time, sir. And it's been really cool. And hopefully we can get you back on when the market is more volatile, and you can make us feel even more FOMO around what works and what doesn't work.
Hopefully volatile in an upwards direction, right? That's
definitely. I mean, how do you see, just kind of last question before we close it off. How do you see things playing out, going into the halvening? Do you believe that we'll see an uptrend irrespective of what macro is doing? Or do you think we're still very much beholden to what macro is holding us ransom to at the moment?
I think macro is always going to win out at the moment. I think the market's almost, it got too big in a way to like that to come, like it to come second, I think, to the halving stuff now. And I think obviously Bitcoin's still obviously is still the poster boy as well of crypto, and it's still the one that like you don't always say like you work in crypto, you work like have you heard of Bitcoin is normally the first thing. But I do think like the impact of that halvening is like less and less and less each time. But I think the macro effects around the world are the dominant force. The extremely high rates that you can get, like it's kind of DeFi can't really compete so much with those external rates right now. And if and when those rates drop, I think it's going to help bring some of that stuff back. But I'm not sure. I would like to think it's going to have a bigger impact, but I'm not holding out my hopes too much for it this time, unfortunately. But I know there's many people are though, right? So I think many people are kind of looking forward to it, and there's a lot of different kind of arguments on either side. But yeah, it's too global in my opinion, the macro effects at the moment to not be the primary driver.
I think it's easy to agree with that rationale. I think it's easier than to kind of like, go all in on this idea that the halvening is going to do what it's done in the past. We'll have to wait and see. I tend to agree with you. But I suppose it isn't easy to be bullish in this environment, and it'll be, I think, very interesting to see how it plays out. And once again, the experiment continues. It's kind of like more of the same. So let's see.
Absolutely. Yeah, we keep building.
Cool.
Right? That's what we're here to do ultimately at the moment.
Yeah, and you guys have built something really cool. And thanks for your time once again. And hopefully we'll get you back and reflect on this discussion and where the market will be at that time. Cheers.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.